Hello. This is Nancy Newscaster. Welcome to this episode of Copyright Corner. Today we have a special guest with us from the United States Copyright Office, Frank Fairuse. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Nancy. It is nice to be here.
Frank, we would like to dedicate this episode of Copyright Corner to helping teachers and librarians understand copyright and fair use laws. Can you explain what copyright is exactly?
Of course, Nancy. Let me first recommend a source that all school libraries should have in their collection. The book is called Copyright for Teachers and Librarians in the 21st Century by Rebecca P. Butler. This source defines copyright law as a law that protects for owners original works of authorship from which the author can be perceived, reproduced, or otherwise communicated. This means that copyright owners have the exclusive right to reproduce or copy their work, to distribute their work, to publicly perform or display their work, or to create derivatives of their work.
I see. And why, Frank, should copyright law be important to teachers?
Well, Nancy, copyright is important because it protects the rights of those who have created works, or those who have purchased the right to own the copyright of a work. If people want to use the work of the owner, they need to ask for permission.
Of course. But I thought that there was a way for teachers and librarians to use copyrighted material without asking for permission. Is this true?
Yes, it is. This is called fair use. Fair use limits the exclusive rights of a copyright owner. In other words, the rights are not exclusive when used in an educational setting. However, there are 4 factors that determine whether the use of copyrighted material is fair.
What are the 4 factors of fair use, Frank?
I was hoping that you would ask that, Nancy. Factor 1 has to do with purpose and character of use. It looks closely at how those copying the work are going to use it.
What do you mean by that, Frank?
Well, works copied for educational, non-profit, or personal use are more likely to fall under fair use than works copied with the intention of making a profit.
I think I understand. For example, if a social studies teacher wanted to make a classroom set of copies of a newspaper article about the election, that would be okay.
Yes. As long as the teacher does not try to sell the copies for profit. Fair use factor 1 also allows teachers and students to use copyrighted materials if they are transforming the work somehow.
What do you mean by transforming the work?
According to Stanford University, you transform a work by adding new expression or meaning to the work. Or you add value to the work by adding new insight, information, or understanding. So if a teacher uses a clip from the movie Rocky to teach about the geography of Philadelphia, that would be a transformative use, as that was not the original intent of the movie.
How interesting. Now, Frank, what is the second factor of fair use?
The second factor of fair use has to do with the nature of the work. In other words, what are the characteristics of the work? Is it fact? Or fiction? Is it published? Or unpublished?
What difference do those things make?
Under this fair use factor, the most usable piece is one that is factual and published.
Ah, and that fits with your previous example. If a teacher copies a factual piece of published text, such as a newspaper article about the election, it can be used in the classroom. And what about fair use factor number 3?
Fair use factor number 3 has to do with the amount being borrowed. Do you want to use an hour-long excerpt of a movie, or just 5 minutes? The rule of thumb is that you should use the smallest amount possible to reach the objectives of your lesson. This factor is measured in 2 ways. One question to ask is how large of a portion are you using in relation to the size of the piece as a whole? Again, less is more. Another question to ask: is the portion you are using the heart of the work? If so, then it may not be permissible, even if it is just a small portion of the original work.
Excellent explanation, Frank. Now what about fair use factor number 4?
Fair use factor number 4 has to do with the marketability of the work. In other words, does your copying of the work affect the ability of the owner to make money off of the work himself?
So, that would mean a teacher could not buy one copy of a textbook and then copy it for the rest of the class. Because if the teacher did that, the publishing company would lose money.
Yes, and that would also mean that the band director could not copy sheet music for the band. The music publisher would lose royalties.
It seems like there are so many rules and regulations. How do teachers and librarians make sure they are compliant?
Just as it gave the examples I have already discussed with you, the book Copyright for Teachers and Librarians in the 21st Century gives some great suggestions of how to stay compliant. For example, keep these fair use factors handy. Consult the policy of your district on copyright and ethics. Consult books in your professional collection. Obtain permissions and licenses when necessary. Pay royalties. Do not attempt to profit from your copies. And try to use materials you create yourself. Above all, set a good example for your students. Cite your sources at all times. While this is not a substitution for obtaining the proper licenses and permissions, it is a step in good faith to give credit where credit is due. Teachers and librarians need to model responsible copyright practices.
Thank you for joining us today for this episode of Copyright Corner. And thanks to our special guest, Frank Fairuse. We hope you will join us next time.